We've heard about the NPP 2024 manifesto, but tonight we're going to hear from the business community. We're going to get a verdict of the business community on what the manifesto has for them. Now, we counted some 55 promises in the NPP manifesto that addresses the concerns of businesses generally. Either you're talking to Guta, you're talking to those involved in agribusiness, and even those involved in other forms of businesses. There are 55 promises there that were targeted at them. We're going to get their views on these. Does it address their concerns fundamentally? We'll get the thoughts from the business community on this matter tonight on PM Express. A few things that were important. When you take the manifesto and begin to digest it, of course, you've seen the implementation of the flat tax rate or tax amnesty that the business community is responding to. There's also the big subject of the reform of the tax sector generally, is what Bawumia pitching on over the weekend, which is an important point for him, but also the charging of port fees in cities is going to be a big intervention for the vice president if he wins. Currently, every port charge is in dollars, which obviously then imposes significant concerns for those who trade and bring goods through the ports, because we import almost everything into this country. And so that then becomes part of what we pass on into our goods and services in this country that creates inflationary pressures that we now know. So if he says he's going to have a situation and a mechanism that allows goods cleared at the ports to be charged in cities, that hopefully bring some stability for those who will be using the ports to import goods into the country. That's a key one. Also to harmonize port charges, because we're comparing ourselves now to our peers in the sub-region, and he wants our port charges to be lower than what we see in the sub-region. He mentions Togo to be very specific. And then there's a subject of strengthening the gold purchase program as a tool to control the depreciation of the city. So these core interventions are important to the business community. A few other ones that we are paying attention to, obviously the Gold for Oil program, they want to expand that, again, as a tool to deal with the rising cost of fuel prices. And then, as you know, the cost of fuel prices affects almost everything in this country. If you control it, it also leads to the stability on the price front, and inflation also is impacted positively. Enhancing the credit system is one that he also mentions. Business community will be responding to that here on PM Express. And also clear the outstanding contractor arrears and payments. That is a key problem for those who do business with government and they pre-finance these projects, but they don't get the monies back in time, eating away by inflation, but also eating away by the depreciation of the city over time. Strengthening the public-private partnership is a key thing that the vice president talks about. But one of the key things that we're also been isolating is the credibility of the promises made. Over the period, we've seen the 2016 manifesto, 2020 manifesto, and 2024 manifesto now that the NPP put out. He himself has been there throughout. Some of the promises are repeated. So if you didn't do it between 2017 and 2020, you have 2020 again. Some of them were repeated in some shape or form, again, has not been implemented, and they're repeated it again in 2024. You need to ask the question fundamentally, what is the credibility in implementing something that you had 8 years to do but have failed to do, although it was in your manifestos? And one of the key points is promoting made in Ghana goods. It's been there, and it's been brought back in 2020. In the 2020 manifesto, that Bawumia again was there as a running mate. It was there in some form, support made in Ghana products. We've seen that it hasn't been much uptake when it comes to that. The implementation of this has stalled. Now we have it in 2024 manifesto too, where he's now talking about, they've couched it sexier, but it's fundamentally the same principle. Buying Ghana first policy. Pretty much same as what you had in 2016's manifesto. Promote made in Ghana goods, support made in Ghana products. Now they're terming it Buy Ghana first. So if you haven't done it to the point where it will have a great impact on the economy, what's the guarantee that you can now do it in 2025 going forward? Is a key question that the team needs to answer. But businesses are also looking at this and asking themselves a fundamental question. Establish special economic zones is one that was in the 2020 manifesto. Dr. Bawumia obviously was there as a vice president, was the chair of the economic management team. That hasn't happened to an extent that will really have an impact on the economy. In 2024, it's back, creation of special economic zones. So clearly he believes it's a good idea, but under his own watch as vice president, it was in the 2020 manifesto. And he was a man who championed the 2020 manifesto. He read it, he put it out, and he read this in 2020, establish special economic zones. It hasn't been done. He's read it again in the 2024 manifesto, creation of special economic zones. So why didn't he do it in 2020, between the 2021 and now? Why hasn't that happened to warrant its repetition? That's a key one that we are also watching. There are a few more. 2016, we have strengthening pharmaceutical industry. Government thought that was important. It came back in 2020, promote local production of pharmaceuticals. And we've seen that it hasn't quite materialized the way the government had anticipated. And so it's back in 2024, establish pharmaceutical industry, industrial parks. So again, same question being asked. Why are you repeating when you had 8 years in government? A policy that you could have implemented? Fair question. That businesses are also looking at prioritized payment of government arrears as one, but we've seen contractors again still complaining. It's back in 2024, clear outstanding contractor payments. So these are very important points to observe, and the depreciation of the cedi is a very big one. As you've seen, they want to deploy the tool of the gold for oil, but also the BOG gold purchasing program to deal with this. But it's been climbing, as you see there. We're talking about 15.61. This is really understated, because if you go to the bank, they're quoting today at 15.8. In fact, the black market's quoting 16.05. So clearly this needs to be dealt with, and dealt with immediately. And the gold for oil, though, as far as its impact is concerned, this graph tells a story that when it was introduced, it has an impact. And our monitoring shows this. You see the downward trajectory there, but eventually it has stabilized the prices of fuel there, which is what Bawumia wants to expand to deal with the issue of depreciation. My guests will join me, guests who know what they're talking about because they experience the economy on a daily basis in their businesses. I want to hear them give me their feedback and their verdict on the 2024 manifesto put out by the NPP. Stay with me on PM Express. And PM Express is always brought to you by Syntex Tanks. It is strong, it is tough. It's also brought to you tonight in partnership with many election headquarters partners. And as I always recommend to you every evening, no matter your water needs, Syntex Tanks has it all. Syntex Tanks has first introduced a double layer tank, and now you can have as many layers as you want. You can call them nationwide on 0244 335 168 or shop online at syntexgh.com. Joining me right now for a conversation tonight is Dr. Joseph Obin, is the president of the Ghana Union of Traders Association, GUTA. Dr. Theo Champon is a political risk analyst and economist also, watching closely the manifesto as put out by the NPP. We're also joined by Anthony Morrison. You remember him, he was on the show with me when we did the Agric manifesto. So he's back, he's seen one manifesto. That's to deliver on what he told us that he were expecting in the party's manifesto. He joins me right now. He's the CEO of the Chamber of Agribusiness, and he's in the studio with me. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time here on PM Express. And I want to start with you, Dr. Obin. I know the NPP met with GUTA when they were putting ideas together. Now you've seen the final document. Does it reflect what you told them?
Yeah, so most of our input have been factored. You know, ours have been the cost of doing business in the country. That have been the problem for us, the complex nature of our tax system, and then we want it to be simplified and affordable. And so all that we seek is to have a simplified and affordable tax system. And that's why all of them probably, now we are talking about NPP manifesto, so they are talking about the flat rate tax system, and then also to restructure the VAT system. I've told you so many times that the form is not right, that we have one tax system with 3 forms. It doesn't make it conducive for us at all. So primarily, these are some of the things that we need. The tax amnesty that we're talking about, because of the cumbersome nature of our taxes, and then the numerous taxes that we pay, definitely most of us will fall short and default some of these taxes, and they are huge amount. And that, if we have to clamp on us, some of the values that they mention to us sometimes, when we are found to, is very scary. And so if we give us the break, and then give us this debt forgiveness, then of course we start afresh. That one is also in good stead. Because now most businesses want to do the right thing, but they cannot do. Because when you start filing the right information, then they use it to benchmark your wrongdoing, maybe sometimes 6 years back, and then make you pay. So it doesn't help even the nation itself in its.
So a lot of people who are owing and are defaulting in paying taxes want to pay, but they're afraid they will be used against them.
They will use it.
Okay. So that's tax amnesty. You demanded that when you met the NPP?
Yeah, we demanded, but that we had been given the hint when the Vice President talked at the UPS. He mentioned this
that's something that he wanted to do.
Amnesty and all that. So when the committee, they have, all of them have the Manifesto committee coming to us. So we made sure that they factor it into the main manifesto.
I'll come back to you because I know the subject of the depreciation of the cedi is big for you. Yeah. But on those 2 points, I want to bring in Dr. Teochampo. Doc, this tax amnesty, flat rate, combine that with the tax amnesty, all come under the tax reforms that the Vice President wants to implement in this manifesto. What's your verdict of it when you assess it as a tool for promoting growth and helping businesses like you have in Guta?
Good evening, and a pleasure to be here. I think it's laudable. At the end of the day, what you want is compliance, and you want compliance that allows businesses and entities to not only pay their taxes, but the government also to collect more, right? So to the extent that the processes for filing taxes are cumbersome, and that pushes certain of them away, and even in a way allows the so-called informalization to take place, then that is a problem. And I think the proposals on the tax front, particularly the flat tax rate system, and then the tax amnesty, and we can talk about the others, are all very much welcome. It's also important to state that some of these are not exactly new, right? So you can go back and you can see we've had the VAT flat rate scheme, the 3% VAT for some certain businesses in times past. And I think what will be interesting really to sort of interrogate further is whether or not these did work in the way they were envisaged in terms of before and after. Have we seen an improvement in the collection levels, the rate, the level of compliance and effort? And I think largely the anecdotal evidence supports that, and that is what fed into this. And as you can hear from Guta as well, that they were consulted, and everybody has been crying, particularly about the level of taxes on goods and services. I was shocked myself 2 weeks ago when I came down to Ghana. I bought food worth about 200 plus Ghana cedis, and I had to pay quite a considerable amount of different line items of tax, from COVID levy to NHIL and things like that. And I think the better, or the more we simplify it, the better it becomes from a compliance point of view, but also allows us to collect, more for national development purposes. And we've seen this work in other jurisdictions. I think the Vice President talked about Estonia, where you've got a high degree of digitalization, but almost like a flat rate system when it comes to taxes. And for things like even corporate income tax, if you're a company in that jurisdiction, you pay 20%, it's going to go up to like 22%. However, when you declare your profit and you actually reinvest your tax proceeds back into the economy, effectively, it's given back to you as a rebate. So you pay like 0%, right, on that. And I think those proposals are very much largely welcome.
But the specifics, though, I mean, we are talking about the budget here. We're talking about the manifesto that often now has become a governing document. when you have an incumbent, who's also the vice president, talk about introducing a flat rate, it's a fair question to ask, okay, what rate are you looking at when you say flat? And how does that look like in reality if you get the nod for 2025 and beyond? Do you have the clarity reading the document?
No, it's not clear from the document what rate. But again, if you take the VAT rate that currently most businesses are paying, effectively it was 21.7 or so %, right? So if we can harmonize all of that just on the consumer side, I'm not talking about corporate income tax or payroll taxes and others, but if we can harmonize that and even it to between 15 and 17%, right? While at the same time making it easier, less forms, and easier for businesses, SMEs, you name it, to file those taxes, I can guarantee you that we actually will be collecting more than we currently are doing.
I mean, does it naturally follow? Listen to Bawumia read the manifesto over the weekend in the summary. He says the ultimate objective is to have low tax, high participation. So he has made the calculation and come to a conclusion that if we lower the tax and make it simpler, it will increase your tax bracket and bring more people into the tax net. Doesn't necessarily follow?
Yeah, so there's some kind of studies, empirical evidence to this effect that indicates that when you improve the level of compliance, so in other words, you get people to file, it's a bit more easy, there are no punitive sanctions or measures and all of that, you tend to have a bit more people, right, complying with that, because then you have no incentive to actually want to cheat or game the system. And like Dr. Bin was just saying, you know, sometimes DRA will do these retroactive assessments, and on the basis of the information you file, tell you to pay, you know, something down. Sometimes they even pay 30% of the assessment before you can even start having a conversation with them on the actual numbers. And I think that does not augur well for businesses.
And Tony, so the question really is for you in the agribusiness, how much of an issue is the tax regime currently? And do you see in the manifesto the proposals addressing the concerns that you have there? Well,
thank you very much, Evans. Yes, I read the flat tax systems that the manifesto enumerated. I think that I like the way Doc also put it, but we have to be clear. In Estonia, what systems exist? Do we have it there? How long would it take us to begin to achieve some form of flat tax scenario? But for us in the agriculture space, we import quite a lot of things. Everything to do with the downstream production, whether on livestock or crops. And for the past 3 years, we have had challenges with, our members have had challenges with clearance. Sometimes it goes into demurrage. And having to, for instance, look at feed additives or maybe vaccines or feed other agrochemicals staying so long at the harbor.
But why is that though? Is it because the port charges are exorbitant?
Yes, you know, at a point that was 2022, there was a realignment of the taxes. And for the agriculture sector, we were supposed to have some tax exemptions on some imports and others. But the way it was realigned did not actually help us. And the clearing system was so cumbersome and so long. And, you know, agriculture and what we deal with has to do with time. You need to be very specific on it. So for us, we will look at it with our members. We have our consultants as well who are tax experts. We'll see how this will inure to our industry. But of course, we were looking at something more direct. If a country, for instance, Ghana, our importation bill, food importation bill is over $12 billion, and our budgetary allocation, which is public financing, in terms of the budget annually, is even less than $1 billion. So you would have expected that some kind of hope to see the government trying to set aside possibly $2 billion annually for us to be able to work against our food importation. Don't also forget that the population is increasing. Currently estimated to be 32.6. Others are estimating about 36. So we need to be very careful what we are looking at. And specifically in the current situation where we find ourselves, okay, where across all the country, this year's food production is going to be a very sad one.
I mean, it's interesting you make the point about setting money aside for food importation, because if you read the manifesto, the focus is about industrialization. So we are producing a lot more locally and relying less on imports. But on that subject, I'll come to the agric sector broadly, but there's something that links both of you in the studio on the subject of the ports. And you say one of the biggest cost to you is what you're paying at the ports, and your goods are getting stuck. Guta has the same challenge.
Yeah.
Do you see interventions in the budget that address this problem? For example, the manifesto says they would have, if he wins, have a system now at the ports where the port charges are in cedis and no longer in dollars.
Yeah. He
also says we'll reduce the port charges lower than what you have in Togo and our peers in the South region. I know I see a smile on your face. Does it mean that this is something that you welcome, or you approach it with a bit of skepticism, pinch of salt?
Well, yes. One of the key factors that influences pricing is the forex. Okay, and normally when you come back to Ghana to clear your goods are also denominated in forex terms, and with cedi being applied, of course, that would possibly also. But then, maybe my brother will also agree with me that it wouldn't make a lot of difference, because when you go back into the global market to purchase the same quantity, it depends on the strength of your cedi at the time.
Because you still need to because you sell locally in cedis.
Exactly.
But you're buying from outside, you're importing it in dollars. So you still have to find the dollar to bring it in.
That's it.
But definitely, that's one line item. That's in your cost build-up, right? And then you have what you pay at the port. So if that is stable and it's in cedi, that cost line item is gone.
Yes, of course. That is.
So then the only thing you have to bear is buying the dollars to purchase, make that import.
Let's also just suppose this with the situation in Togo. What we're trying to do here in Ghana and what is in Togo, the Togo one is not a free port per se. All right, there is a 49 cap on certain commodities and sectors that you look at. So let's not get it that it's a straitjacket application. What we need to be looking at here is sector by sector tax policies that are used to the benefit. A blanket application of it. We're talking about our health sector. We're talking about our food sector that has implication on health. Okay, we're talking about our construction sector that has implication on both health and agriculture. Bad roads have impact on agriculture. Bad roads also have impact on health. Okay, people's health. So we need to look at taxes that are applied within certain economic zones that have its high impact on the economy than the flat system we're looking at it.
Okay, and this is something that bothers you greatly, Dr. Obeng. The proposals in the budget to deal with the challenges of the ports. What's your verdict on it?
Yeah, so that is our main concern. He was talking about the factors of costing, and he mentioned the exchange rate is a major cost factor, because that drives all the things, especially when you are clearing goods. It is benchmarked in dollar. You know, he was saying that we have to make the duty cedi-based, and
yes,
that.
Yeah.
It's because of this. So that that's what we have been saying, that if we do not have any control over stability of us, at least we have control on the rate that we use for the purposes of clearance of goods, that it should be pegged. And that, I think that's in that line that he's talking, that we have to make it cedi-based for the clearance and all that. If it is pegged, then of course the fluctuations and all that will also go down. So clearing goods at the ports, as we always have been saying, is very difficult. And if you compare it to the neighboring countries, you know, the business that we do it in competition with our neighbors. And that's why he keep mentioning Togo as a reference. There's nothing wrong to use the best practices of another country.
But Dr. Obeng, you remember that this is not the first time the Vice President in particular is referencing Togo in introducing reforms of the ports. You remember when they did the benchmark values?
Exactly.
Again, Togo was a reference.
Exactly.
Did that solve your problem?
Yeah, the benchmark was going very well, until at a point, because you were saying that you were asking somebody if the taxes are made affordable, if we can get the revenue that we require. Yes, and it was attested in the benchmark reduction policy, where for 3 or 4 years on, we attained or we even passed the target, revenue target of the nation. And so if you make taxes simplified, you know, tax to GDP in the sub-region, we are really behind because of what? Because our taxes are more, and then the tax system is so complex, and that it doesn't ensure compliance.
They're just doing some 13.1%.
13, where others are 18,
16, 16 above, 16.5
and all that.
and above.
And because their taxes are so simplified, we were Ghana Shippers Authority and some of stakeholders went for FAT funding, and then we went to Togo, for instance, and then the cost of clearance, the shipping line component, theirs is about 1%, and that of Ghana is about 5.8%. That alone, the shipping line component. So if he is referring to Togo, and then we can prune down the shipping line charges alone, then we'll be saving about 6% there. And then the other factors that help them. Because you see, how do we go to Togo to buy goods all the time? They are not a manufacturing hub. Togo is not a manufacturing. They also import goods.
Because it's cheaper there.
Because cost of clearance is cheaper.
Yeah. So then the pass-on effect is that is lower compared to what you have in...
So we have to learn. We have to understand. And we have been there.
But I guess the question I need to ask you is, if it's that simple, why have we failed to implement it in Ghana? And then that leads to the question, why do you believe that the Vice President can do it when every other president before him had failed?
Because they do not use compliance as a method of enhancing revenue target. They rather use imposing taxes on us, high taxes, numerous taxes, and they think that that will generate the taxes, and we are failing. And so tax, if you make it more affordable and you make it simplified, you are bound to get even more than that. And so that's why almost all the political parties are gearing towards that.
Interesting point. Let me bring in Teochompo on that same point about the ports. You've heard the Vice President's proposals, except that these proposals, in some shape or form, we've heard it before, but we haven't seen it translate into real impact in the economy. I mean, and Dr. B mentioned the benchmark values over time worked, and then somehow it stops working. You've heard the Vice President again on this. How much faith do you place in his ability to make this work at the ports, considering how much revenue the government makes from the ports?
Evans, let me...
Just a second.
Okay.
Just a second, yes.
Let me correct something.
Yeah.
The benchmark was working perfectly.
Yeah.
So AGI came in to say that because of the benchmark reduction policy, it has made imported goods so cheaper
than what you produce locally.
Yes, and that they are not. And so that's the only reason.
Yeah, but then the government then decided to what? Backtrack?
They backtrack because they think they have to safeguard the interests of the local.
But that's the point, right? If you believe in a policy as the best means to achieving the greater good and outcome, then you stay the course.
Then it has been an experience, because even after the benchmark was removed, the local manufacturing entities have not been even more competitive.
But you raised a very important point, and then, Prof, I'll put that to you. If you implement what Baumia is putting across, won't the same challenges that AGI, for example, pointed out, for which reason the benchmark intervention was withdrawn, rear its head? Because if it becomes cheaper to import and clear the port, then you expect then that we'll have more imports. Does it follow naturally?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dr. Bean makes a very, very fundamental point, which, connects broader economic policy making, in this case, import substitution, right, with bringing in goods from outside, right, which is that if you take a like-for-like good, so maybe let's use a very simple one, tin tomatoes, right? Tin tomatoes that are produced in Ghana, taking all the factors into account, your taxes, your exchange rate, the cost of capital and all of that, vis-a-vis bringing that same tin tomato through the Tema port or even through the Togolese port, for argument's sake, right? The point is that it is uncompetitive using that tin tomato analogy to often produce in Ghana because the cost factors are quite prohibitive, right? And so the question then for me is not just a question of just reducing or harmonizing port charges. That is important, that is good. And there's competition amongst ports even across our sub-region, not just Togo. You go to Abidjan and a few other places. Lowering the duties would help in terms of the imports that come in. But then you have to balance that with systematically ensuring that your domestic local industry can actually manufacture and compete both in Ghana before even thinking about export. So I think it's a multifaceted approach, and there are trade-offs that have to be made in this regard. And this is where other aspects of the manifesto becomes extremely important. What are we going to do on industrialization? How are we going to ensure that, for example, the cost of electricity, right, is competitive? Already there's talks about bringing 15% VAT on electricity back, sometime later this year or next year.
Yeah, but Bawumia has said in the manifesto, Bawumia said in the manifesto on that 15% that that's something that he won't do.
Yes, but that's been said. But the news reports today, including from, IMF reports that talks about, potentially bringing that 15% back if inflation starts coming under control. So it's not exactly off the table. But the point I'm trying to make is that you cannot have it both ways, right? You have to address the structural causes that ensures that your businesses are competitive. If you are bringing in tin tomatoes, for argument's sake, that tin tomatoes that is produced at a factory in Tema, using either Ghanaian tomatoes or whatever inputs coming in, is competitive to tin tomatoes coming through the port at Togo or some other place. That is really the crux of the matter.
And that obviously is a very important point. And it was you, Tony, who makes a point about how the imports, the cost of importing stuff and clearance of the port is leading to great impact on the agric sector. But let's focus for a minute on your sector. Yes.
I also stated clearly that, like Doc stated it, the import tax and production taxes, when you remove tax on one and wanting to increase production or viability of the other sector, it must go with certain conditionalities, okay? Like for instance, the agriculture sector, if you are putting more taxes on rice, imported rice, government now have the utmost responsibility to increase budgetary allocation directly towards rice production. But when you put a cap on tax on imports and you are not supporting what is required to make that tax viable or that tax, you're absolutely not doing anything. And that is what we're talking about.
You give me your verdict on the Agric proposals in the document, because you helped us appreciate what in your industry, what you are looking forward to in any budget, in any manifesto. I keep saying budget, any manifesto. Did you see the things that you were expecting in this manifesto?
All right. Thank you, Evans. When I came here last 2 weeks or so, we benchmarked our findings on the 600 policy interventions of the National Development Planning Commission. And now, so I think that to make a fair verdict of every manifesto, we need to look at what is the NDPC saying for this short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals. And does this manifesto align to those critical policy alignment and priorities of this country? Because NDPC is for the people, right? Okay, these are paid with the taxpayers' money. So I was looking at this from the gaps, the production gaps, the logistical gaps. We're also looking at processing gaps, that's the agro-industrialization gaps. Then we're looking at the marketing gaps. And finally, sustainable financing gaps. Now, we were looking primarily to be seeing something like, okay, clearly, majority of the 70%, I have gone through 16 pages, 16 chapters, okay, actually mention Agric in one form or the other. Yeah. The green financing, the green jobs, and all its derivatives, talking about the cost of living, all looking at food. I've gone through. What we are saying clearly is this. What is government commitment towards direct funding for agriculture? The first year or the first 4 years of the PFJ, 2.7 billion cedis was put in. Meanwhile, within the same year, our food importation bill went up by $4 billion. Our post-harvest losses went up by 2.6 billion, right? And WFP even clearly stated that we are possibly in the region of having food insecurity, okay? So do we have what the current situation is incorporated in that manifesto? What
they say about that is that they want to expand the plan for food and jobs, rearing for food and jobs too.
You expand on something that is effective. You expand on something that is working. If it's not working, what do you do?
What's your verdict on it? Is it not working?
It's not working. As we speak, I can tell you, speaking from people, with my members and other chapter and associate members, from OT region all the way to the north, I can tell you, ministers, MPs, and chairpersons of NPP are the people distributing fertilizers and seeds, right? How do you expect people, farmers, now going back to buy those inputs to go and produce?
So instead of expansion, you expect a reform?
We need a complete, you see, the agriculture sector needs a complete overhaul. And look, I'll give you one example. Why, as a country, over the past 60 years, we keep dwelling on cocoa? How much does cocoa give this country? Do you know the global value of cassava? 179 billion.
A lot has been said about that.
All right? And cocoa is only 47. Do you know how much corn, the global value of corn? That is almost 370 billion. Oh. Okay? How much of cocoa do Ghanaians eat or consume? When you put emphasis, and I stated the last time that the Economic Intelligence Unit gave us 3 things that if we are able to do properly, it will help to safeguard our agro-industrialization and food security. First, aligned your policy to the national interest. What is our interest as a country? We consume a lot of cassava. We also export a lot of cassava. Okay, Thailand, that doesn't even consume a lot of cassava, makes more than $2 billion annually. How much do we make out of cocoa? 1.5 billion? Okay, now look at rice. Look at the poultry industry. If you produce enough, we consume about 3.2 million metric tons of maize annually. Our deficit is about 900,000 metric tons. Meanwhile, our poultry bill importation for frozen chicken is about 1.2 billion. Why don't you invest a lot into maize? So we can be food sufficient. The poultry sector is the biggest value chain in the whole of the agriculture sector. So when you neglect the likes of rice, maize, you are neglecting the poultry sector, and that is going to have a long-term effect.
And if you read the section on Agric, it bullets interventions. The primary focus is industrializing the sector. And by the way, you would say that you've heard this before in a lot of the manifestos that we've come up in the past, as in mechanized agriculture, making it a bit more responsive to current trends and etc. That's something that was the #1 focus. Also, engineering food security. It's a key point that you mentioned. The key intervention then is food sufficiency, but also through the Plan for Food and Jobs, they plan to deliver on this. You said that isn't working necessarily.
The PFJ
so it may not deliver that.
PFJ 1 failed, and PFJ 2 has even failed because the private sector element is even up.
I mean, food security
they are not even participating in it.
Was one of the primary objectives. You say it hasn't delivered that over the period that we've implemented it. Drastically reducing food importation and saving foreign exchange. I mean, this is a problem that Guta also has, because a lot of the money we spend on importing stuff, we spend on importing food.
Yes.
And that is what then places pressure on the
we import fruit juice
on the city.
About $400 million.
That we can produce in Ghana.
Tomatoes, we import from Burkina Faso, Morocco, South Africa, Netherlands, 1.2. All right? We are the largest consumer of processed tomatoes in Africa. If you look at the aquaculture for food and jobs, I told you I've read this very well, so I can tell you page by page. The point here is that Ghana is the second or third largest consumer of fish in Africa. We introduced the aquaculture for food and jobs. What has been the impact? Our fish importation bill keeps going up. You see, when you come up with a policy, the economic intelligence stated clearly that government comes out with policies that politically they are not committed to it. When you come out with a policy, be committed to running it.
Yeah, but this is a manifesto, so it's an intention.
Well, then why do we need a manifesto? Let's go to NDPC and take what they have done and run with it as a country.
Then that's another point that before the manifestos came out, it was a big subject, as in, are the manifestos reflective of what the NDPC had put up? Right?
No.
So that's a key point. I want to bring in Professor Theo Champon into the conference. Theo, so you listen to the Agric sector, and of course the verdict there is, I'll come to for your verdict, but I get a sense that you don't see a lot in there that is responsive to the real needs that you expressed as far as the sector is concerned. It brings up how, because again, everything else we're talking about must eventually tie in to getting us out of this economic challenge that we are in. It must all make sense. It must be an integrated approach to delivering on that economic growth and economic recovery that we are on. Having read the document holistically, we've talked about the Agric sector, we've talked about trading, etc. Do you see that this document is sufficient, adequate, to get us out of this current economic crisis that we're in, on the path of growth and recovery?
So it's actually not about the sufficiency of the document. In fact, you can go back to manifestos all the way from the Fourth Republic, 1993-96, and you see, if you do a thematic or textual analysis, almost similar things being said or replicated, whether it's NDC or MPP or whichever the party is, right? So at least there's some consensus on the things that need to be done. There is also an issue about the sequencing or sort of the timings around which certain things must be done, and the alignment with the broad, principles of state policy and the national development planning, aspirations that the other person in the studio, just said. The issue is not the content. The issue is what the political economists will call credible commitments, right? Is there actually an appetite? Is there a will? Is there the sequencing, the integration of these policies and manifestos and ideas to ensure that they actually are implemented in a way and manner that delivers on those broad objectives? That is where the big political economy issues really, come in. So as a piece of document, and I can guarantee you when the NDC one also comes out or the CPP one comes out, you would see very similar things, whether it's Agric or it is industrialization or value added and all. Some changes here and there in terms of approach. But the fundamental thing becomes, the political will to actually implement this one. And then number two, the finances, the fiscal space available to actually execute and implement, these projects, right? And you will see that in our current context, there's not a lot of money. So both of the manifestos and others that will come out, one big thing is, okay, so what's the price tag, right, of all these interventions that we say we want to do, especially on the bit that government is going to do. The private sector side, you cannot directly quantify that. But that's another conversation that needs to be had in terms of the impact. And quickly on the Agric, question, for me it's interesting that if you take the top 10 items that we import, from the corn and the poultry and those other things, many of them you can actually produce in the country if the factors are right, the taxes, the exchange rate, and all of that. But I also think one thing that needs to be done, and which I'd love, our party to actively work with. We always talk about the private sector, but one of the things I think one group we can work with is the churches, right? We've got these big organized groupings called church or church groups. I'd love to see our churches get into large-scale commercial agriculture because they have some of the resources in terms of the finances. The government can support them with incentives and all of that. And if you get, for example, the Catholics, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Pentecostals, you name it, imagine they all came together and one of them said, okay, we're only going to do poultry, you do maize, you do soybean, you do something else. And they are actually producing and running this at scale. I think a lot of our problems within agriculture could be solved.
I mean, Dr. Bing, Professor Choi Jean-Paul talks about, it's not about how good the document is. It's about the political will and the commitment to implement them when you get the power. And he's right. Having studied Manifesto for the period, and that's why we did a comparison, you see repetitions or rephrasing of old policy proposals that same party will bring it back year after year, election cycle after year, election cycle. What's your level of confidence that, yes, you are applauding the interventions to help, obviously, the trading community, that these will be implemented by, I guess, a chance? What's your level of confidence?
So this is a social contract. And so I've told you, in the past, they will formulate their own manifesto, and at the tail end of the campaign, they come and show it to us. But this election, we demanded that we want to factor our input into their manifesto because they are all potential government. And whatever they do, it will affect us. So all the manifesto committees have come sit down with us, and we made it clear that if it is possible, we are going to sign a memorandum of understanding, or we are going to do an undertaking for this. So we are more serious this time around. And at least we have something that we are going to give a pinch when they are diverting. And so
how do you plan to do that?
It's not going to be business as usual, because this is a social contract.
I'm curious, what mechanisms do you plan to deploy from 2015 into 2028 to exact full implementation of the things that they promise you and they've included in the document?
Let's say we are starting afresh. Let's say, because we are just 4 months into an election, and then we are going for a new phase. So let's even pretend that nothing happened in the past. So
you're starting afresh in 2025?
But this one, we sat down with them. We weave it.
So how are you going to exact implementation? How are you going to make sure that they don't
Because now, this manifesto is intention. You know that.
Yes.
It's intention to do something. Yeah. And then when one assumes power, then we are going to put it in a policy. That's where we come. We are stakeholders, and we will all do this. And so we use this as a reference for the policy that we are going to.
And if they deviate, what do you do to them?
No, this is a policy, and that's why I'm demanding accountability.
Yes, I guess my question is, how do you propose to exact that accountability in 2025 and beyond?
First of all, we will demand that we sign something like an undertaking. Or,
but this is the time to sign it, because if they win...
Yes, now they are all coming out. Because first we are just building the manifesto, then after you finish, then we demand that let's put a signature somewhere so that we can refer to it. I think it's fair if because we have to go beyond some of these rhetoric and then demand proper accountability of this. Let me also take advantage of some of the manifesto, some of the points that we raised that have been captured in the manifesto. For instance, we propose that we build economic hubs around the border towns.
Yeah, Bamia mentioned it.
Exactly. So we are going to make these economic zones, maybe Afrawu and all that, where our businesses, our mainstream importers, local manufacturers can also attract our neighboring countries in the cross-border trading activities that we do. Because these countries are taking it all. Nigeria, you see the number of people who go to Nigeria, they change their hard currency to go to that corridor to buy. So if we are very proactive and then we build those economic zones there, it will be easier for...
bullet them for me because I have 2 minutes.
And then also, we are talking about interoperability of the for cross-border trading purposes.
You mentioned that too.
That one is very important. That where people put money in their pockets and travel and all that. If we're able to do this international, and then we can change this one, then it can also boost. Then you remember that we came here and we said that we want to establish a traders bank.
Yes.
I've proposed it so many times. It is not my mandate as a businessman to build a bank or to establish a bank. But out of frustration, lack of access to affordable credit and all that, we said that then probably we have to establish our own traders bank.
Are you referring to the SME bank?
Exactly. So once we have the SME bank here, then it satisfies my... Because if you can have a subsidized credit, it's not only for trading, for agriculture, like my brother was talking and all that, then we will be better off. Then they have also established Women's Trade Empowerment Fund, which is also going to work. This is going to be like a grant for our the women in the informal sector to revitalize.
Tony?
Evans, no country in the world has developed with commercial loans in agriculture sector. Let's be frank with it. It requires deliberate government, continuous and sustainable funding to develop the externalities of the agriculture sector. What we're talking about is agro-industrialization. And let's not be kidding ourselves that when we continue to have sloganeering sort of 1D1F, 1D, those things don't develop. It is the political commitment and the will to say that my people... Are you
convinced
for instance,
these items are backed by political...
We are exploring crude, petroleum. Over the past 10 years, what has happened for us committing 10% of the proceeds to set up a fertilizer factory? Do you know how much we spend to import fertilizer? Okay? We're talking about things that will have sustainable impact on the agriculture sector and that of the economy. Over 90% of all seeds that are produced in Ghana here for food are all imported. And we're not seeing things in there that can actually change the sector. And we are talking about the fact that, like he said, you can't hold people their promises. I mean, what form of appraisal system can we even put in place? Okay, the best is to look at the NDPC. We need a channel where NDPC with other civil society organizations will hold the political parties to their form of promises that they put in their manifesto.
He said that they will sign a document with them.
But this is a promise. You understand?
What about you? It's an intention, of course, but they met them, and so they have a say in that. What about you? I need to wrap up on this, but what about you?
Yes. So for our sector, we continue to say that, look, we want single digit for agriculture funding in Ghana. We need government critical continuous budgetary allocation for the agriculture sector. And of course, intentional mechanization.
Okay. That definitely I saw that he mentioned in industrialization. Unfortunately, Doc, I need to wrap up, unfortunately. Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you very much, Tony, and Prof too. And Dr. Champa will join me because we'll be doing a sector-by-sector breakdown of the manifestos after the NDC launches theirs on Saturday. Enjoy the rest of your evening.